Welcome back to A Simple Low Carb Life video series. We're now starting Module 4, Video 1, and this one is about label reading. This is a very important skill to have, one of the most important ones really. So we're going to go in depth about how to read a label accurately. All right, so Nutritional Label Reading 101 is the name of this little section. So basically we're going to teach you to read the nutritional label on each and every food item that you plan to eat. And I can't emphasize that enough. If something does not have a label on it, that you know exactly how many carbs are in it, how much protein, etc., then simply don't eat it because it is not worth it. There are so many foods with sneaky carbs in them that you can think you have something that's remotely healthy and it can be extremely high in added carbs. So this is a very important thing to do. There are a few key things that you really should know about when you're reading a nutritional label. And if you approach this in a very methodical way, it will help keep you from eating foods that are really unhealthy and not good for you in any respect, but certainly foods that keep you away from eating foods that are high in carbs specifically. So, step one, very first thing we're going to look at is the carbohydrate amount in grams. And when you look at any nutritional label, every nutritional label in the United States and other countries as well who've adopted our process will have a section called total carbohydrates. So you want to see what that amount is. Now, as a subheading underneath total carbohydrates, and this is carbohydrates per serving, so it's really important to look at the serving size, but we'll go into that in a minute. We are going to be mostly looking at net carbs. Now, what are net carbohydrates? Net carbohydrates are total carbs minus the dietary fiber, which, as you may recall from prior videos, that dietary fiber goes through us. It is not absorbed, so it doesn't make our blood sugar go up, so we can subtract that. And we can also subtract 1/2 of the amount of any sugar alcohols that are contained in the particular food item, if it contains any. So net carbohydrates equals total carbohydrates on that main bold heading minus any dietary fiber. So you don't have to break that down into soluble and insoluble, just the dietary fiber total. And subtract 1/2 of the amount of sugar alcohols. Secondly, you're going to look at the protein in grams and see what that number is. There's no calculating with that, no subtractions, so you just look at the protein amount for that serving size. So, keeping those principles in mind, let's look at a nutritional label example. And this is a made-up, basically protein bar, shall we say. So, the serving size is 1 bar, so whatever size that package is, and this is common when you pick up a protein bar, it'll often say serving size is 1 bar, but you really need to look at the serving size because sometimes it will say serving size is 1/3 of a bar. So you think that you can eat this whole thing and you can't for that same amount of carbs. So real important to know the serving size because that is a common way that you are deceived on any kind of a nutritional label to make something look healthier than it really is. So total calories, there'll be a heading for that. In this case, it says 250 calories. Total fat is 14 grams. Total carbohydrates in this example is 23 grams. Dietary fiber is 9 grams. Sugar is 1 gram. It's another subheading you'll see. Sugar alcohols, or also commonly called polyols, but usually on a label it will be indicated as sugar alcohols, although sometimes they'll specifically list if it's erythritol or xylitol so that you know it's not like any other garden variety sugar alcohol. But in general, you'll see a heading that says sugar alcohols. In this case, it's 13 grams. So if we apply that formula, total carbohydrates minus the dietary fiber, so 23 minus 9, minus 1/2 the sugar alcohols, which in this case is 13 total, so 6.5. So 23 minus 9 minus 6.5 grams equals 7.5 grams of net carbs. Now, that is a whole lot less than 23 grams, but there's a problem with this label in this particular snack bar, which we'll focus on in the next section. So remember, this example has 23 total carbohydrate grams, even though the net carbs is 7.5 grams. This is a problem, and we're going to go over why. So now you know the net carbs of that item, and you know the protein amounts. So what happens next? What do you look at next? So going back to that previous label that said it had contained 23 grams of total carbs, even though the net carbs ended up being only 7.5 grams. Why is that a problem? Well, if you eat any food, whatever it is, that per serving contains more than 15 grams of total carbohydrates, not net carbs, but total carbohydrates, even if net carbs is 0, you really need to think twice before eating it to avoid your glucose going up, which means insulin overproduction, fat storage, weight gain, and the awakening of cravings. And why is that exactly? Well, we're going to go over that. But you remember, first off, that during weight loss, you want to remain less than 30 grams of carbohydrates, net carbohydrates, for the entire day. So any serving of food containing 15 grams of total carbohydrates is still not worth it. Even if the net carbs is 7.5, it's still a lot of carbs for one food item. Now, here's the FYI. Even though net carbs may be low, like the example that we just saw, a higher total carbohydrate amount will still cause a blood sugar spike, which results in hunger and stalled weight loss. And this is exactly why. Because carbohydrates begin their absorption in the mouth and then to follow in the stomach. They don't wait until the small intestine to be absorbed. So even though dietary fiber that's included and mixed with carbohydrates will blunt the response of glucose, because fiber especially will negate some of that, dietary fiber plays its role mostly in absorption from the small intestine. So if you're eating a high carbohydrate item, some of that is going to be absorbed when you eat it. If you have a ton of carbs in something, even if it has a lot of fiber in it, you're still going to have your glucose go up a little bit. Probably the finest example of that, of a protein bar that can do this, is a Quest bar. Quest bars are popular and touted as being low carb, which they are low in net carbs. For example, they may have 23 to 25 total carbohydrates and 18 or 19 of that be dietary fiber. However, nearly everyone in my practice that eats Quest bars gets very hungry, which is a tip off that your blood sugar went up, and it stalls their weight loss. And all things being equal, when their diet is otherwise intact, it's those Quest bars, because the total carbohydrate amount is still high enough to allow some absorption of glucose to the degree that it makes their blood sugar go up. So if you pick up a bar that has that kind of a profile, my suggestion first off would be don't even eat it at all. But if you can discipline yourself to only have half of one, or even a third of one or a fourth of one at a time, then you'll be far better off, and it's something you could theoretically eat without causing your blood sugar to go up. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, step 3, we've already looked at the carbs and the protein. What do we look at next? Well, you can take a peek at the fat grams just for your own information. And if your weight is stalling, that might be something that you could look at. But basically, in the low carb way of eating, we don't really need to pay that much attention to the fat unless everything that you eat has high fat in it. And the role that would play is if you're getting all of your dietary fuel needs from fat that you're eating, then you're not going to burn any from your fat stores, which that becomes maintenance. So you want to have your fat be increased from what you've been eating, certainly on a low-fat diet. But if you eat too much fat, then your body won't be able to burn fat from your fat stores. So, as they say so aptly in the Atkins approach, they have a saying that is savor, don't smother with the fat. And just remember that's a great saying. You want to have the flavor of fat, you want to get a little fat for satiety, but don't smother your food because it's a lot of calories. If you may recall or have read somewhere, basically 1 gram of carbohydrates and 1 gram of proteins equals 4 calories. Well, guess what? Fat, 1 gram equals 9 calories. So fat has twice the caloric value that protein and carbs do, which comes to play in your diet if you're eating too much of it to the point that your body can't burn any from your fat stores because you're getting all your fuel needs from your food. So that would be maintenance. We're not trying to talk about maintenance right now. That's a strategy used in maintenance to stop gaining weight or stop losing weight rather. So you need to have your fat be slightly lower than what you would need in maintenance so that you can burn your own fat stores. So just look at the fat grams, but don't obsess over it like you did in the low fat diet. It's really just for general information, not really a deal breaker. So let's move on to the next. Again, you want to eat enough dietary fat to feel satisfied or satiated, but not overly full. Savor, don't smother. Just remember that. A little fat goes a very long way. Lastly, the very last thing you want to look at, if at all, is the calories. It's not really important in the low carb lifestyle if, big if, the other parameters are within the proper range. So let me give you an example. Look at all of those 100 calorie snack items that you find in the central aisles of any grocery store. Snackwells, other cookies and all sorts of things that are 100 calories. Well, you think, wow, that's only 100 calories. I could eat a whole bunch of those. Well, remember that carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. So if you have a 100 calorie snack, if you divide that by 4, theoretically, if you're eating just a sweet product, a 100 calorie item could have 25 grams of carbs in it. Well, if you had 2 of those, that's 50. That's more than you should eat for 2 whole days. So the calories are very deceiving, and that's why so many people have weight problems that are just calorie counting. They're not taking into account the makeup of those calories. And really, the makeup of the calories is far more important than the calories themselves. So exact calorie counts only matter if your carbohydrates, protein, and fat are in healthy ranges, and that will keep the glucose stable, and you're losing weight. So if everything seems to be in the right parameters and you're not losing weight, you're probably eating too much fat, which is adding too many calories, and then we would just simply have you cut back on your fat intake a little bit so that you would burn some from yourself. That would be the strategy. Step number 5, you want to scrutinize the ingredients that are listed on that label. If something contains corn syrups, fructose, sugars, hidden sweeteners that come in various long chemical names, or chemicals whose names you cannot pronounce, if there's a lengthy ingredient list, it's usually something that is not good for you, that has a lot of processing. And that has a role in making people hungrier and gaining weight. So scrutinize those ingredients. If it has a bunch of chemicals in it, you might want to try to pick something that doesn't. Now, you're soon going to be an expert on detecting hidden carbohydrate sources on labels and hidden ingredients on labels. So you really do need to look at the labels. Step 6, and really step 6 is extremely important. You need to note the serving size on the label and don't just be lulled into complacency when you look at that and say, oh, well, this only has 4 net carbs in this product. Well, a lot of times they will use deceptive labeling and it'll be 4 net carbs indeed for 1/4 of that item, not the whole item. So you really have to watch the serving size. Don't just assume that the nutritional label amount is for the entire container. I've been tricked on that myself. So read the serving size and then calculate your particular serving and the carbs that go along with it. This is the most common way that high carbohydrate foods are marketed as being low carbohydrate by deceiving you with the serving size. Well, yes, just about anything you eat, if you broke it down into 12 servings and as one little tiny thing, would be low carb. So you really have to look at that serving size. If you use these steps when you approach looking at a nutritional label, you will now have the right tools to become an expert label reader. And I would strongly encourage you to do not eat anything or buy anything that you do not know exactly what the nutritional information is. Now, produce doesn't have a label on it if it's not in a bag, and pastry items, a lot of them that are fresh, do not have a label on them. So I would not eat anything that you do not know the nutritional amount. So produce, you can look that up in MyFitnessPal. There are a lot of things that you can look up in MyFitnessPal, but if you're going into a bakery, in general, none of that is low carb. So I would avoid it and not eat it if it doesn't have a label and it's known to contain many ingredients that are high carb. All right, congratulations. You've just completed Module 4, Video 1. We're going to move on to the next module. Again, as always, please take a break in between so that you can absorb the information, and we'll move on to the next video when you're ready.